Hey guys.
It's like low-end DJ.
That's my low-end DJ. That's my
Rachel
low-end
A.
DJ. Hey, we're starting a alumni call, but we decided to invite more people than the alumni, it looks like. And this is our first evening call as well. So we're just testing out to see if this is a better time for most people, but I actually don't know. But it looks like there's quite a few people on already. So Jason is on. And James, hello. And Marina, hello, Marina. Monique is here. You know Monique, right?
Yep, my student.
Yeah. And Sean, you're still at work. And yeah, Cheryl. And so we have some varsity people back too as well. So hello, welcome, welcome. I hope you will answer our poll. We have a little poll underneath. We're asking you, what is your passion? Typography, math, topography,
Neither.
math, or neither? And what's yours?
Well, both, of course.
Both, okay, of course. Math, Bradley. Yay. Bradley, just math? Hopefully it's more than just math. Hopefully I'm thinking maybe topography as well. All of it, okay.
That all works, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. So we haven't had an alumni call in a while because we've been a little bit busy. We were at TypeCon a couple weeks ago doing a presentation about the math of typography. There's actually quite a lot of math, but what we're going to cover today is just one aspect of it. Do you want to talk a little bit about this aspect?
It's pretty much what we did there, right?
Right, but this actually is derived from the phototypesetting era, is it not?
Well, sort of, yeah. It's to give you the background of what this discussion was, is that Marina will probably understand what I'm talking about, but those of you that haven't done paste up boards before may not know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I'll try to explain. So before the computer, just before, in the late 80s, I was doing end reports on paste up, with galleys, photo typesetting, or cold typesetting, whichever we want to call it. Cold type is what we called it, where you would specify the type, size, length of column, width of column, measure, and everything to the typesetter, and you get your galleys back the next day. Well, I was always tasked to go to the art store and get the boards for these end reports. And so I watched my boss calculate how many boards we needed, because with the math of type, if you calculate the words on a page and then the depth of that page, how many lines per page, then you can tell how many pages you have. Therefore, how many spreads you have, therefore how many boards you need, because every board you paste up a spread, which the boards are 15 by 20, just like they are now. So then he would say, go ahead and get 2 boxes or whatever. And so I watched him do that. And it's not like heavy duty math or anything, but you had to calculate. And what I found in watching that is, the proportions that are involved with margins and, columns and everything. So, and this is just going to take you through that method of thinking, really. A lot of people now will just throw content in a InDesign doc and see what page count it comes out at. But I've always tried to think ahead of that before getting into the software and figuring it out. Now, this just gets you to, a page count for layout. It's a different matter of trying to determine, exactly how many forms you're going to have on press, and what paper is going to come in what size. And I'm not going to get into that minutia, but it gives you a ballpark on what to expect, because the printers still have to. They actually will tell you how they're going to run it, and there's all these other terms that will come into play, work and turn or whatever. You at least want to know if you have a ballpark on forms, you can get a ballpark on price, and usually, hopefully within a few $1,000s, hopefully, depending on if you've worked at that printer for a long time or not.
So you were talking about boards, mechanical boards. Yeah. We might want to say what the boards were for. I mean, how many of you have ever worked in paste up or in phototypesetting?
Boards and show what it looks like.
Sure, we can do that. But I'm just wondering, has anyone done that before? Let us
Crickets.
know. Yeah.
Oh,
Michael has.
Good,
oh, excellent. Good.
So you understand.
So the boards were basically what you would turn in. Sarah's is in high school. Never did one for a job, really, Marina. Okay. So a board is what you would turn in to get shot, correct, Michael?
Yeah, it would photograph the board that had the type on it, and then they would strip it. The rubylith would be placements for photos, and they'd strip everything together and call out. You'd have to call out colors, which go where.
Right.
And all
Different
that.
layers.
Yeah, it's very much more simplified. You can, if we wanted a gradient, it was a huge fucking ordeal with the printer because, the banding and everything is really difficult to do gradients there. So even before we got to direct to plate there, bitching and complaining about it. I can understand. It's kind of a tough thing to do, to have a smooth gradient.
Right. What is Marina saying here?
Velox
What's a Velox?
already screened. I don't know what Velox is. I forgot what it was.
Velox for a photo already screened. So yeah, I mean, basically there would be different layers, and that's actually how we built graphic design back then, is in layers. It's not really done now.
Yeah, the mindset though, guys, the one thing to catch from this is that you would know me better if you went through this process, because you had to start with the board and you had to draw out the grid in blue pencil, and then you had to place your waxed back galleys type on the board first. So type always goes on the page first. All the visuals or pictures and everything came on an overlay on top of that. So I still work that way with, even in InDesign, you'll get text and image, separate layers. I still work that way.
Sorry,
Thanks, fire truck. So I still have that mentality of separating, the layers of how, printer would strip them out.
Right.
So, I mean, that's really what it comes down to. It's always format, grid, text, image.
And you would never see the final. You had to plan.
No, you just cross your fingers as the boards go out the door.
Right.
And you'd wait for you'd see images first in form of patch, just, pictures on a page. And then after that, you get a blue line and then compose proof after that.
But that's why math was so important, because you had to calculate.
Well, you wanted to at least estimate. It wasn't a matter of trying to get accuracy.
Oh.
It was trying to wrap your head around of what kind of page count we're talking about here. How many press checks are we talking about here? How late are we going to be there? It's just all tied together.
Got it.
We could estimate, oh shit, we're going to be there all night, kind of a thing. Right. So,
especially if you had a lot of boards.
Yeah. And we have to literally either drive them there or later on FedEx, we get those boxes, but it was too expensive. We try to save that money, just get it there another way.
Right.
Try to use local printers.
Much heavier than a zip drive.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll start the presentation. So let me just share this, and Michael will talk through the math of typography. Let me just zoom in on this. There we go. Can you guys see this okay? Yeah. All right.
How can you tell?
I know. I'm going to just move this over here. Yes. Okay, great. All right.
So I'll take you through this. It's not going to be word for word from TypeCon, but let's see. For us at RAMP, most of the time we design projects that end up being printed a lot of times. We do digital too. But my background comes from annual reports and 20 years of doing a lot of those. And here's a few. I think I'm up to 76 or 78 at this point in my career. And they're a wonderful process, a wonderful vehicle to deliver a story. And they come in all shapes and sizes and printing methods, and they're a lot of fun. So today I want to talk to you about and go through the process of one of these annual report projects. And I think a lot of you have seen this report that I'll use as an example. But typically our clients come to us with a plan and a budget. Sometimes we come with a budget to create, one of these annual reports that summarizes their year in business. And some companies are public, where they're required to, from the SEC, the government, to file every year. And some are private. And this one that we have, this small one that we have, is particular one is private. So it's not on NASDAQ or stock exchange or anything like that. But what these are, guys, are their financial documents, but in the 60s somewhere, maybe in the late 50s, Paul Rand worked on annual reports, and they became more of a marketing tool, not just a financial document. Because I can show you old annual reports from the 30s and 40s were just numbers. But somewhere in there, they became a marketing tool as well. And they started to write and show more pictures and talk about the story of the company that year and what they went through. So what it is that we produce is a multi-page document that ranges, somewhere between 24 to like 80 pages, somewhere in that range. Typically it's 50. So we start out brainstorming ideas, and then we, get some concepts going, and then we put it together. But in the beginning there, it starts with math. And what we try to do is ascertain how many words we're talking about here. Because a lot of shareholder letters, which is a typical chapter in these reports, they go from like 2,500 to 5,000 words, somewhere in there, depending on the company and what they're writing. But from there, we can, get an average on words for the front part of the book. And then the back part of the book, since the government requires certain charts and sections that the CFO has to divulge to the government, we can get kind of a ballpark page count from that. And then we can add on a few pages for, marketing story and that kind of a thing. So we start with a few mathematical formulas from phototypesetting. And this isn't like high-end math or anything, guys. It's just proportions again. And I won't go through my background here. But just a little thing here is that some of you guys know that the transition from aerospace engineering when I was in college to design was quite easy because we were trained in physics and math and engineering. And so when I saw the proportion thing, kind of light bulb went on in the design department. And I go, okay, this could be pretty simple for me. So I've used math as a tool to solve a lot of these little problems in proportion over the years. And a simple algebra or geometry to estimate pages, like my first boss showed me. But what I learned is that characters and words can be calculated into pages, which leads to an estimated cost. Now, I'm going to show you a path from word count to, an estimated cost, but it's going to be loose. I'm saying ballpark. It's not going to be accurate, guys. You can get it. It gives you a lot of information and a good idea. And that's when you would want to confirm with a printer if we're in the right range, just so we can give a ballpark to the client and if it's somewhat accurate, okay? So if you can count how many words, you can get to the pages, which you can get to the forms, which you can get to some kind of ballpark cost, okay? And these, when you see these figures, they're going to be really general, so. I think it's a good idea that designers know a little bit of math because it's connected to proportion. And I think a lot of designers miss the connection of the type to the image to the page. And that triptych family there is always in harmony. And that's the way we learned it back then through the numbers. And I know that may seem a little deep today, but it doesn't have to be on the surface. For me, I never show that part. But if something comes up where I have to teach it or show it to somebody, then I reveal it, and that there's an underlying purpose and structure underneath, where everything is on the page, okay? Yeah, it's not atom splitting calculus or anything, that kind of stuff. And what I just to you, I explained just a minute ago of talking about these boards, and here's what, when we had a production class in college, this is kind of what it would look like. And we had Xerox copies back then, and we could put the picture on the tissue. You see this stripe here where we're showing a sample of what the coloring might be, this orange and blue. So it could be a 3-color, orange, blue, and black, right? And then, all these instructions that went on there and for the prepress to, pull apart and confirm and make sure that we got it stripped correctly, okay? Boards were sent out to the printer like this in a stack. And we used to call those mechanicals. And I still call my final files that I'm working on that are going to prepress mechanicals, actually. I don't know what you guys call them, but...
files, I guess.
Yeah, just files. But yeah, when I see mechanicals, I know it's production. I'm no longer in design for as a comp stage. I'm now in production. And there's always been 2 stages for me in the process of ideas and concepts and selling the client on an idea with a comp. And when they pick one, we're now going to go produce that. So even fees are ascertained by creative costs more than production per hour, right? So it's always this duality of creative versus production. So I still kind of, you know, have always worked that way. Not that you have to or anything. Let's see.
You want to give that story?
So yeah, just when my first boss and mentor moved our design workflow to the computer, somewhere around 1990, in there somewhere, 91, I transferred those skills of mathematics and formulas to InDesign, but back then, of course, it was called PageMaker. We were using PageMaker, which most of you probably don't know. And yeah, Rachel calls those the Designosaur years.
Designosaur days.
Yeah, that's kind of like my unofficial tagline, Designosaur, around here. So, and this is one of those things I don't miss. These mechanicals, they took all night, oftentimes. We'd be at the office till, you know, the next day. And it's much faster now, but the principles haven't changed, right? The process of the drafting is still the same. Drawing the lines, making sure everything's accurate is still the same, even though we're using software. And so these simple mathematic processes that we had still work now, depending on, you know, if there's other variables not being used like foil and custom binding or whatever else. But usually when that happens, I'll go back through and rifle through my old estimates just to find a ballpark there and add them on. So, but just in your head as a print designer, if you're doing, you know, multiple page documents, this is the kind of thought process that we had back then and still have now. Okay. So here's how it goes. It's really simple. I mean, it's more complex than this, but just to boil it down for you, we go through the word count to page count. We get page count to signatures. Signatures will give you a number of forms. Okay. And, again, this is just a general way of thinking of how to get ballpark estimate on time and cost for printing. Okay. So we start with measurements and units, and this is why a lot of you, especially my students, I always say to stay in points and pikas, and that's because a lot of these rules and math only work with points and pikas from the old days, and they don't work so well with inches, and I've tried it with inches actually, and pixels. So, and the reason is because numerically there's a relationship to all these. As you can see, there's a common denominator here of 6. So the whole print world, to me, numerically, has a base of 3. And that's important to me because it's an odd number. If you know Japanese numbering, you might know what I'm talking about, odd numbering thing. But it's all interconnected proportionally that way in print. So with points, once you know your page size, you can figure out the size of the spread, right? And 2 spreads printed front and back make what's called a signature, okay? So, and 8 signatures can fit on a form typically, but it depends on the size of the form too. This is a larger form here, a 2840, and you're usually going to run covers on that. But nowadays, the printers have gotten larger presses, and this is up in Vancouver. This is kind of standard up there. But it depends on the printer too. Sometimes it can be 12 or 16 depending on the form size, like I'm saying.
And the form is determined by the paper manufacturer?
Typically, yeah.
Okay.
And it used to be a 2335 was the typical size, which you would use for text. But, you know, if you guys know any updated information, you know, let me know. But this is generally how we would try to figure it out, get a, you know, roundabout idea. So once we have the word count, you know, we can get words per page. And because we're setting body copy and it's always first, we aim towards a common body copy size of 9 to 12 points, just like a lot of you have learned. It's typical there. So once you have a body copy range size, you can determine in most serif typefaces, you know, how many words you're going to get on a page depending on leading and how many lines, okay? And for this particular import project, the client suggested a smaller size so it could be a little more personal to their investors. So we have a 6.5 by 9.25 size, and this has been this way since 2004. It still is now. Okay. So at a standard ½ inch margin, here's where numbers come in. We end up with a measure of 33 pikas, okay? That's because 6.5 inches minus a ½ inch on both sides equals 5.5 inches, which equals 33 pikas, okay? Once we have a type size and font, we can calculate the characters per line, okay? And in InDesign, it could, in the info palette, it can tell you all this. We want to aim towards 50 to 70 characters, right, per line for a comfortable read. For example, if we were to set Baskerville here, Baskerville regular at 9 point, we end up with a line length of 104 characters, which is a little bit too long, right, as you know. So we tried, start trying other typefaces that aren't so, small or large. If we set a wider font like Clarendon, light at 9 points, the line length ends up at 91 characters. So we're getting closer. Again, a little bit too long, but there's less characters per line because the character width is wider than Baskerville's, okay? So what I'm trying to say is that it depends on the typeface. It always comes down to the typeface. You've heard me say that many times. And what point size you're using, okay? So what's the best type size for a measure of 33 pikas? There's actually two methods you can use that we used to figure this out. And one is a good place to start is to take the measure and cut it in half, right? Okay. And so when we have that number of 33 pikas, you want to try to determine what half of 33 is. And that is 16.5. So if we set our copy at 16.5 points in New Century Schoolbook, then our line length ends up at 53 characters, which is just about right. It's kind of a sweet spot. But 16.5 is too large for body copy, right? So that number doesn't quite work. Because we have so much content, we want to keep the body copy size down to 9 to 12 points, okay? To accommodate a type size of 10 points, we can either increase the margins to shrink our measure, right, which would be substantial, or cut the measure in half by creating 2 columns, and that's probably the better way to go here, okay? So since the proportions are relative, the type size, depending on the typeface, of course, has a relationship to the measure, and we learned it as 2 to 1. I mean, it's really 1.6 to 1, or the Fibonacci number, technically, to 1 as a ratio. So if you have a measure of 36 pikas, you cut that in half, you convert it to points, you're going to get 18 points as your type size for that particular measure width. Okay. So I just try to get everybody to think 2 to 1 because the math's a lot easier. If you guys can do 1.6, fine. Because we had a small page for this project, we increased the margins to give the page some space. And since it's so small, I already knew that we could get 1 column's going to have to work because 2 columns at 6.5 inches wide is going to give us really small type because it's proportional. So I know I'm going to be at the small page size and only going to have 1 column, like I was saying, yeah. Now within a 24 pika measure, I can fit New Century Schoolbook Roman at 10 points quite nicely, and ending up at about 70 characters per line, or 13 words per line on average. So it's a little high, but it's going to work, okay? Now that we have an idea on words per line, we can look at our column length, or depth, if you will, and calculate the number of lines per page. And this always reminds me of Gutenberg's Bible, the 42-line Bible, right? So he had 42 lines, and he could really look at that and go, based on the word count, you could figure out how many pages. This is kind of the same deal. So if I use 16-point leading to give the content plenty of breathing room, right, for, what am I using, 10-point size type, I can get 32 lines per page. So 32 times 13 equals 416, or 400 words on average per page, okay? I can fit about 400 words per page, or 800 words per spread. Okay, so I start, accumulating that kind of, page total. Now we need to estimate the number of sections to get the total page count, and this is where you have to kind of work back and forth with the client in determining what they're going to say. Okay, in designing an report, the shareholder letter section is the first to be estimated, and you can usually take a guess at what, by looking at their last year's report, the report they did before. And I just kind of asked the client, you think you might write more or less? They usually say the same, about the same. So for this particular annual report, though, there's 3 presidents because it's a private company, not a public. And in a public company, it'd just be the CEO writing the letter. But since it's private, they have 3 partners here. So they have 3 letters for the book. So 2 letters from these guys have approximately 1,500 word count. And then one gentleman has only 750 words. He writes a shorter one. Because we estimated 800 words per spread, and the first letter is 1,500 words, we needed 2 spreads. So now I'm starting to count spreads, as you can tell. The second letter spanned 2 spreads also because it was also 1,500 words. The third letter needed only 1 spread because it's only 750. Okay, so we just estimated that way. They also have a few charts to support their copy, so we allowed 1 more spread to give it some more room. Okay.
Should we review a little bit of the math? Because I think Zach and Adrian have some questions now. So let's just go back a little bit.
Okay.
And just back here. So Zach, what Michael is saying is if you know the characters per line, then you have an idea of how many words are per line.
You have words per line, right? Because you guys remember typesetting, you want to aim for 60 characters per line. But right below that in the palette there, you see there's the word count. And so a comfortable word count length is like 12 to 9 or 12 to 8, somewhere in there. And if you're close to those numbers, you can use it. So now if I took an average of all the lines, I might end up at 12 anyway, right? So we're just starting with, since it's estimating, we start with 13 words per line. Now we just need the number of lines.
Right.
And that's once we have the number of lines times the number of words, we've got words per page at a roughly 6 by 9 size. So now we can start estimating pages.
Right.
And that's where we get to this chart.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
It is really straight from the type. Depending on the typeface, you can get characters per line, words per line, number of lines times words per line equals words per page. What section you're doing and how many words are in that section, you calculate how many pages. And we'll get the signatures and forms in a minute, as it starts to connect to the press. Okay. So far to count, we have 6 spreads or 12 pages so far. Okay, like these here. So if you're looking at the layout of the whole book, we're 12 pages in, like the slide says. Now I need to find out what other content the client needs to include in order to determine the sections for a total signature count. So we need page count to signature count. You don't necessarily have to do signature here, but this is where it's going to start crossing over to the client and with the printer, because printers are thinking in 4-page increments. And as a print designer, you want to as well, really. Okay, so this particular company invests in apartment communities in different regions, just to give you a little background, across the nation, and they have 9 key regions to highlight. Okay. So a region contains 150 words on average as a summary for that year, and a property chart with that, as you can see on the right page here. Each property will be designed as a spread because we also want some artwork to go with all that content. Okay, so now we have, since they have 9 regions, so that gives us 9 spreads or 18 pages, right? So here's all the regions laid out. Add that to the shareholder letter section of 12 pages, that gives us 30 pages. Okay, so you can see how these go. So in the client meeting, we asked questions and calculated along the way about, we asked them what else they needed. They also have a financial chart. So that's another spread, as you can see here, listing, what happened that last year, what properties they sold, what properties they acquired, what events they had, and so on. So now we're at 32 pages. Okay, we want to show a map as well to show all those regions. So that's a spread. We also have a region and city chart. That's another spread, like you see here. Now we're at 36 pages. Okay. I also asked, what do you want to focus on this year to talk about? And they said, well, we want to talk about 4 main topics. Okay, and that's typically on average for this client. They want 8 extra pages usually to talk about their story. Okay, so 36 plus 8 there now gives us 44. So now we're there. And so as they keep talking, they say, well, we want to show our team, corporate directory, if you will. So that's another spread. Now we're at 46 pages. Okay. We want a timeline as well, because this was a special thing this year, and this is kind of a special printing thing. But they wanted to fold out. So that's really 8 more pages here to accumulate our total. Okay. And I won't get into too much printing here, but it's a double gatefold. Okay. So it's a fold out that shows the entire line. So now we're at 54. And so I usually ask at this point, since we're near a total, is 54 easily divisible by 4, which it isn't, right? So I figure we need a couple more pages. We need a page 1 intro, and then maybe, since it's a special year, we could say a little bit about the 40 years of service they have for the company. And so that gives me 56 pages. So now 56 is divisible by 4, okay? Now, as you see us go through this, all these boxes, we need to see how many signatures we have so we can estimate how many forms we have, okay? So now we start to think in pages of how many signatures will fit up on a form. There are 2 pages in every spread, so 56 pages is 28 spreads. Here's where the math comes in, over here on the left, okay? There are 2 spreads in every signature, so 28 spreads creates 14 signatures, okay? Within our 28 by 40 form, we can fit 8 signatures, okay? And since we have 14 signatures, we needed 2 forms for the text pages to run the inside of the report, okay? Because the cover usually is a heavier paper, and you run that on a separate form. So I'm looking at 2 forms for the text. Since this report's cover paper is heavier, like I was saying, we need a 3rd form to run the covers, which made 3 forms total. So in my mind, when I see that, I go, I have 6 checks to do, 6 press checks. And that's a long day to do all those, because depending on the quantity, you'll do a check and say, everything looks great, run it. 3 hours go by, they finish that, and now we're running the other side. So if you do the math there, you're pretty much going to be there all day. Okay, so we have a cover running on heavier stock and the text running on a lighter stock. So if we do a ballpark cost here, each text form at a standard 4/4 process, and Marina, this is pretty much ballpark. This might not even be close for now. So this is just to get an idea on cost. If we have 4/4 just straight process, print run costs $4,500 to print at our quantity of 1,200 units, let's say, because we have an average of past projects we've done. That means our 2 text forms comes to around $9,000, right? So add another $3,500 for the cover, and we get around $12,500. If you add in all the other variables like labor and tax and shipping, binding, and everything else, we'll get to a ballpark of between 18 and 20, somewhere in there, okay? So the typography really can get the numbers to your head to a point of, wow, I can really just kind of tell a client what they're looking at here. Because even if I said 15 to 25, that's enough sometimes to tell them where they're at. And even if you open up the wider range like that, it's at least enough to start the conversation, right? So this is how we calculated pages from the beginning, with character size, word count, number of forms, and arrived in estimated printing costs for this particular report. So we can use math as a starting point straight from the type. And again, a variable is the typeface itself. You saw us going back and forth between typefaces to see what the sweet spot might be. You'd have to use 16-point Mrs. Eves, if you're going to use body copy for this. So it really does depend on the typeface. Since we have a transitional typeface, this typeface is pretty big, Baskerville. So all depends on the typeface. And that's what's nice about this. For me, typography is both the science and the art. We use math to begin and then use our trained eyes to design to completion. Okay? And if you're really geeky and you want to see the math of this whole thing, here's the formula. So you can see the whole process in a line item of mathematics here, if you will. So
Michael's just trying to make it seem
looks easy, right?
guys.
No,
yeah.
It looks easy. So, but for me, in the end, math and typography equal good design practice. You know, we try to teach these and these other formulas at TypeEd, like some of you know, to help designers make, you know, not only better decisions, but to save time, because we have to, you know, make so many different decisions during the day. Okay? And time is money, as you know. Okay.
Okay.
That's it, gang.
So that's the presentation. Let's get some questions, guys, if you have questions. So Bradley asks, does that number include binding?
This particular one, when you get up to 52 pages, you know, with my experience, you know, you get up above 48, you're not going to, around 36, you're not going to be, 36, 48 pages, you're not going to be saddle stitching. So this is going to be perfect bind, which has a cost range as well, Bradley. So I already knew I'm going to have to add on more for perfect binding, because this particular client is used to saddle stitching, which is, I don't know, Marina could probably tell us, maybe half the cost of perfect binding, depending on paper and everything else. Right. But yeah, so
the book.
Yeah, so this one is perfect bound, and we try to just estimate that and put it in. That's why I'm saying this is, you never want to get this figure as a final. You want to give a range. Like I said, I'd probably start talking in the range with them about 15 to 25, because it depends on many things. Yeah, the type of binding, you know, the type of paper can even increases. Not too much at this quantity. You start getting over 5,000, the paper starts to factor in, you know, the quality of the paper starts to factor in the price. You know, so.
Marina says you can saddle stitch up to 100 pages of 50-pound offset, but it doesn't look good.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You use 50%. You use 50-pound offset. You touch the page, it's bent, it's crinkled already, because it's so thin. It's like newspaper, right? So that's the thing about all those variables, is that normal text weight for uncoated is 80 to 100 pound for uncoated. For coated, it's usually around 100. 80 gets a little thin, but again, it depends on the paper too, how it's made. But so there's standards in range depending on, and the thickness of the paper also depends on the format size. Like if you have a really wide book, you're going to use a heavier stock because it's going to lay over. If it's really thin, if you use heavy stock in a short piece like this one, it'll be really rigid and stiff, and it won't like fold open if the stock's too heavy. So you have to play that game of trying to make it the right weight for paper depending on the size. Yeah. Right. That's when it gets sticky, when you start kind of have to ask a rep to help you out with that. You know,
it's always more expensive to perfect bind. So yes.
Yeah, so Marina says perfect binding, you need at least 1/8 of an inch, and even with that, printers start bitching and complaining. So I try to keep it at 3/16, just to keep them happy. You know,
why? Because take a measurement otherwise it starts to bow out.
No, it's just really perfect binding. You know, if you get, they have to glue the end of the sheets and then the cover to it, and it just gets. A lot of those thin books that I've had from the past, from 20 years ago, they're already falling apart. So, and that's called PUR glue, isn't it? I think, Marina, that they use for perfect binding, I believe.
PUR?
PUR glue. Yeah, I could be wrong there. Yeah, cut and trim makes a difference. Yeah. So.
Perfect binding is not necessarily more expensive. It depends on the number of pages.
There's many variables. It depends on your quantity.
Sure.
And depends on who's binding it, you know.
Right. Right.
So it really just depends. Yeah. Okay. Oh, PUR glues lay flat. Okay.
That's what Marina's saying. So yeah. So Cheryl has a question. How does one make the jump from inches, points to pikas? I get that the math makes perfect sense, but I'm always in a hurry and reverts back to inches.
Well, again, it's just like anything else, you know. I know we're all in a hurry, but I will stop and think at this point. And since I've been doing it so long, I don't have to stop for very long. But in knowing that points that you're working in print, you always want to work in the measurement that the type's being measured in. So if you're on screen, you're doing pixels. If you're in print, you're in points. You're not in inches. However, points equate to inches, because all pikas are, and a lot of designers cringe when they hear pikas, all pikas are a larger increment of points and a smaller increment of inches. That's all it is. It's an in-between guy. It's the middleman of the number game in print. So And there's really only a few you have to learn. And an average, if you know 6 pikas equals an inch, you know what 3 pikas equals is half an inch, and so on. The bleed, you have to know that's 1/8 of an inch, for print. So that's 9 points in the points of pika world. So there's not really a lot of them that you have to remember, And I've showed some of you in InDesign, if you just type in inches, it'll convert it to points of pikas anyway, which is where you want to stay. And the reason is, guys, the thing about the points of pikas thing is that the reason why you want to do that in print is because you have a more finite measurement system, okay? And if you really want to control the details of your work, I would rather work in points and pikas than inches, because I'm not going to be looking to solve something with a 32nd of an inch. I know none of you have. So it's better just to use points. And just in typography terms, it's when you're handling type, you know that action is more refined in design. You really want to slow down and be more specific with typography than you do, let's say, larger measurements of inches of, picture size to page size kind of a thing. So there's a mentality there of being more intricate with type. So you'd want to stay with points and pikas, yeah.
I mean, I guess the easiest way to get used to points and pikas is just to use them more often.
Yeah, I know if you've done these little equations or rules like I showed some of you, even the 2-to-1 ratio, they really work. I mean, they worked when we were doing paste up, and I still kind of use them now. I can just, what's the page size? And I can already determine. I just use Garamond as a constant, because that's what we use all the time, and it's an average serif. Nowadays it's different. You got much bigger serifs, but I always just start with Garamond, and I know what Garamond will give me words per page in a 9 to 12 point range.
So what you're saying is you use a typeface on a normal basis, and
just
you
to get an
used
idea
to its width.
Now, when I put New Baskerville in there, that's larger,
right?
Because it's a transitional, so I know I'm going to get fewer words per page.
Right. Okay.
So, and it's not by much. It's not by much.
Right.
Yeah, if you've got those really big ones, slabs that they've been using now, yeah, you got to dial it back. So,
but maybe have just like a handful of typefaces that you use on a regular basis, just so you get used to it.
Yeah, and for me, it's just I used Acondens, Grotesque, and Garamond in the 90s. Those were my go-tos, or Caslon. Caslon's a little smaller. But nowadays, I use Harriet and All Right Sans, and Harriet is big, and so is All Right Sans. The X height is really high. So you want to have that mentality now of these larger typefaces, because that's what everybody's come to. The web has kind of brought on that higher X height, larger type kind of a thing.
Right.
We watched that happen at the turn of the century. So I don't always use Garamond as much in my head for estimating, but more like Harriet now, because I'm used to that typeface. Whatever you use, you just want to. I always tell my designers just to know your numbers when you're working on stuff. How many words per line? This point, just if you can remember numbers, it makes the job easier. And I had to do it that way because I was working on up to 8 annual reports at a time, and then some of those tough years, 8 at a time, and to keep everything straight. We're using Helvetica over here, we're using Caslon over here, and so I just jot down numbers per job. Here's the margins, here's the words per line, and so on. So I just had a cheat sheet, a chart, if you will, to keep the numbers straight.
So Monique was asking, what's a good way to practice these methods to get a hold of the workflow?
Just practice them. It's Monique. It's easy. I just like we did the boot camp, right? That whole idea of giving yourself your own homework, like I did. What I used to do when I would scan those magazine spreads at the office and bring them home at night, is I'm looking at every detail. I want to know what typeface they're using. I want to know how many lines they're using. I want to know what if they're doing line per line rag smoothing. I want to know all that. So I'd match it as close as I can, and then just study what I just did. Okay, they're using this over this for the leading. They're using this typeface, and it gives me a wealth of information. They're using this much in the margins. Wow, that proportion to the type size is different, or whatever. Once I've done it with my own hands over and over again, say a dozen times, then it will stick now.
Just getting used to it, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, it's practice. It's just like
anything
anything else.
Right.
You know, Tiger Woods, you know, he'd finish when he was younger, he'd finish a match and then he'd go back to the range and practice again, right? Because he found something that was tweaked. I've always done the same thing. She's watching Narcos or whatever, and I'm thumbing through typefaces. You know, hey, you watching this show? Yeah. You know. So I'm looking for some concept, you know, for the next project. But
And I'm watching TV.
Design's, you know, it's always in your head.
Right. Cecilia's asking, would a designer use pikas for book pieces and inches feet for big outdoor signs?
Yes, that's a yes.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get up above a couple hundred points, maybe, yeah, in type size, then you start working in inches for the sign guys. So, yeah. So definitely inches. The only thing I used in the print world for, you know, normal collateral or books, the only thing we would start with inches in its format. And my boss always said, you stop with inches for the format because everything in between or inside that trim area is proportional and harmonious. But because there's two forms of relative proportion, absolute and relative. The trim mark is absolute, and that's where you stop. Everything else on the page is relative. The picture width to the column width, you know, the type size to the measure, everything is proportional. And if you've been through enough, you know, layout as much as I have, you get through the numbers, you get like a Zen feeling of harmony. I'm not saying you have to do it that way, but when I know all my numbers are good and everything's clicking on grid, that's a good feeling. Everything's clean. It's like you just cleaned your apartment, right? And you want to go back in, track in dirt, and you kind of stay away for a day just so it stays clean. It's kind of like that. And then you go back in and dirty it up again.
We're all saying no spoilers, please. So I'll just tell you that they actually do kill him.
Oh, geez.
So he died. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, you knew that was coming.
I know.
It's a history share.
Did you want to show you guys the gatefold on this? Where is that, Michael?
I'll show you what we're talking about.
Yeah, because you're talking about an 8-page gatefold.
Yeah, so this is kind of hard to plan, but we had to get it in there.
Oh,
so, you know, after one of these letters, you know, you get to, you know, this section here. And so you could feel the paper difference when you come to it. So you get here, and this is the intro to, you know, this gatefold that folds out, where you can see, you have to have a gatefold for a timeline, because this is, you know, as you can see, this is ridiculous. Super wide. And this would have worked better on, you know, like a landscape. You know, if the book were produced this way, it'd be a lot easier. I just use a wide spread, but they always want their book, you know, portrait style. So we had to fit that in. And sometimes, you know, clients, when they have these anniversaries, they'll spend a little bit more sometimes, especially if you have a good idea. So we were able to fit that in.
Speaking of spending more, do you want to talk a little bit about the binding, what you did there?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and Marina, back me up if I'm wrong here, but the printer gets nervous when you have a double gatefold like that, because they're going to ask you they're going to ask you a question of what, there's two ways to go here. And Kevin always asks, do you want that fold of the gatefold to end at the trim edge of the text, or do you want it to, let's see, this is going to be hard to see, guys. They ask, do you want that fold to be flush to the text pages, or do you want it overhang? And if you want it flush, it entails a little bit more cost. And so, of course, you know, a designer's going to want flush, because you want everything nice and straight and even. Don't want anything sticking out. So that's your cue to go, okay, yeah, let's spend the extra $1,000 or whatever.
Yeah, prepare to pay money.
Yeah,
yes,
so that's that's a good one. I mean, because that's really hard to do. This next one that we're doing, if it's the concept that, you know, that they're going to go with, and we just showed them the new one this week. I can show you guys at some point. It's going to have, and Marina, if you're still on, correct me here, but Marina, what's it called when you have an outer page that's smaller and everything jogs down? So if I have a smaller page on top of this one, but it jogs to the bottom, right? So everything's going to jog to the bottom. When they start doing that for perfect bind, it's very hard to keep it together so it binds properly. Printers will usually charge exorbitant prices if you have a small sheet in here. If it's not jogged to the bottom like this, If it's up here, that's a lot of money.
Oh,
That's a
so it
ton of
has
money
to
because they have to
aligned
be at the
bottom.
same height, and they
I see.
basically have to handwork.
Handwork, yeah.
Or sometimes they figure out a jig. When we did Edwards, I had one in the middle, and they just figured out a jig
Right.
to do it. But it's still a lot more money.
Right, right.
If it jogs to the bottom or the top, they're okay with that. You know,
So we're getting a lot of printing questions, which is always fun.
it's cool.
Yeah.
Makes things special. You know,
Yeah,
when you
of
do these
course.
little things. You'll see that. I'm going to post. Once the client picks the new CWS book, probably next week, I'm going to post the 3 comps, and they're completely different. They're all really good solutions, but the printing is like, oh, jeez, you know. So, but I'll show you that.
So then, just to ask you a question. So since the 3 comps are so different typically when you're presenting, how do you know what the labor and tax and the binding is? I mean, do you factor in those printing, finishing?
Well, you can get a percentage based on. I mean, if you went for me,
Is it
if
all
you
the
went back
same
and did
workout?
all the estimates
Mhm.
that we did for CWS here last 12 years, I can get an average, and then I can get an average percent. And with that average percent, you can keep adding it on. And what I would do is actually add on cost of living on top of there because it can keep going up. So you could get, you know, in a range that's somewhere near, you know, to get to that kind of ballpark. And, you know, Marina's saying there's probably other methods that
Sure.
are easier these days.
Sure. I'm just saying
But,
that all 3 comps have the same word count, so you can't
maybe-
really go just by the word count. You
No,
also
of
have
course
to think
not.
about those
And
finishing techniques as
Marina,
well.
if you guys don't know, her husband owns the printer that we print this at, which is a small world. But printers have, you know, more industrious ways of figuring this out, I'm sure.
We're just
Because
coming
they
up
have
with
to
an estimate.
have many more factors like what grain direction in the paper based on the folding, you know, all this stuff, all these details. But yeah, that'd be great, Marina, if you had a secret method that we could learn from.
We can
Because
just
the
get
designers would be happy not to use math if there's a better way, right?
Well, but sometimes we have to do that there in the meeting. So
Yeah.
okay.
I mean, but just like Marina's saying here, you know, you can go online and see what, you know, digital printers cost and stuff like that, to see what the price range is. And the other thing is litho versus digital too.
Mhm.
It's a lot of, I like litho more because I can control color. Can't control color as much in digital.
Right.
So, and you can't print spot color on a digital yet anyway. I think they're coming out with it, but
So Carmina is asking, but do you want quality?
for what?
I guess the difference between digital and litho, right?
Well, they're both quite, digital is very good. You know, digital is very good, but if you're really picky like me and you're doing process and you want to, especially when I was doing Quicksilver and you have these facial tones are a pain in the ass to get correct because they're either too pink, too yellow, right?
Yeah.
So we had to do that with lifestyle photography. And on digital, you can move those a lot more than you can. I mean, and you can move those ranges a lot more, like give me more yellow or red on litho more than you can on digital. And correct me if I'm wrong, Marina. So because the dots are smaller in digital than litho. So if you want more red on digital, you won't even hardly notice. But maybe they're getting different. Maybe they're different now. I don't know. And digital inks are more opaque, so sometimes it's easier to get clear CMYK on colored paper. Yeah. But you still get quality though with digital. It's just that the quantity also factors in. With CWS here, we're at 1,200 units, so that's right on the edge of a printer deciding, we could go either way.
Right.
Digital, because it's usually 1,000 units or so. I don't know what the exact number is now, but my mind is if you're under 1,000 units, you're going digital. If you're over, you can contemplate litho.
Right.
And then, you know, Marina, I think it's, you know, 40,000 units or something, you're going to contemplate web, which is a roll press like newspapers. And we, you know, all those kinds of things.
And Bradley just says the runs. I'm not really sure exactly what he's talking about. But.
Run is the quantity. How many units?
Oh, I
present.
thought it was the other runs.
So, print run, yeah, the other ones. So 1,200 units of the report when it's done, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're running 1,200 units, you know.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to wrap it up. If you guys have any more questions, right now would be the time to ask, but hopefully that helps in terms of the math. This is literally just one of the many formulas Michael uses. But this one's just to calculate estimate while you're sitting there with your clients.
Yeah, so Marina has a tip here too, and she says, I hate this tip, but the whole workflow now is designed to predict what is happening on press. Moving things on press at a press check is not the way to go if you can avoid it. The proofs are going to show you 99% accuracy. I don't know if I agree with that number, but it depends on the press and your pre-press. You're going to get a different result at a different press.
Right.
However, also, like the book we printed last year at Dual, we were going for a duotone. So we wanted to lay on heavier black for those duotones. And, you know, you can't see the weight of the black on a composed proof. You can only see it there on press. And that's where the art comes in of going, hey, pressman, where are you on the black? Can we push it? You know, before everything, you know, type starts spreading or whatever. So, and that's the massaging, you know, art form on press. And if you have a patient pressman, those are really good to have because they, you know, they will let you work your craft a little bit and take a few more pulls. But I always try to explain to the pressman what, you know, what we're after, just so he can see, because, you know, it's not always, you know, apparent, you know. And I like to, you know, I like to have everybody on the same page as far as the vision of the art that comes out in press. So I try to befriend the pressman as quick as possible, so, you know, he kind of understands what we're after. Because sometimes you just have to improve, so you're not going to get everything. So
right.
I'm not going to get them out of black on a proof, so I can't have to wait till press. But yes, Marina's right. They get really close and accurate before, you know, you start pulling samples from, you know, the press.
Much more between a digital proof and a digital final, as opposed to a proof for litho, for example,
Right.
and then the litho final. Yeah, especially if you're going on different colored papers, whatnot.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, and I'm Marina's saying, you know, the more you pull on press, the more fucking around you do with, you know, densities and everything, you're pretty much charged per pull, because the longer you on press, you start ratcheting it up changes,
Right.
you know, on the back, change orders and adding dollars to the final press bill.
So just make sure your client is there.
Yes.
So they know that you're ratcheting up their budget. Marina has a question.
Okay.
Oh wait, right? I have a question. Okay. I'm not really sure.
Sure.
Yeah. What if you are working on a project like report? Maybe like a book? I don't know.
Yeah, a big book. Yeah.
Big book.
Or if you're working on a project like that, and the client keeps saying, we want this and we want that, and now we want to add this. I make them aware of, I give them an education. They're impressed with me and we start changing things. I explain to them, the longer we stand here, the more it's going to cost you. And the more things you want to change, whether it's a plate or type is wrong or whatever, the longer that press is standing there waiting, the more it's going to cost you.
Right.
So they get a little flustered and, you know, tense. But
she's talked about the design stage, because she's talked about page counts and making changes. So it comes down to a process. So basically, we quote
I see.
for revisions ahead of time.
Yeah, again, that's when you have to pull out the word estimate.
Yeah.
And I tell them what the difference is between an estimate and a quote. Quote is finite, estimate is general, right? So, and what the difference is. And so in the planning stages, you're always using the word estimate. Once we have a close range of page count or design, then we say we're going to get a quote from the printer, because now everything's kind of finite. And that doesn't mean you can refine, you can't refine it, because I'll sometimes go back and, you know, Kevin, hey, we need 4 more pages, or, you know, we need to accommodate a specific kind of binding. Can we save any money on the paper? You know, whatever. So, so you're asking about in the design stage, yeah, but what if you know their budget is a 56 pager, and with what they are asking for, they are going to go over. I tell them they're going to go over.
You tell them?
Yeah. And we say, we're right at 56. Here's where we are in forms. And at that point, I may even have Kevin in the room to explain how the forms are laid out. So if he says, you know, if we go to 64 pages, we're on another form. I explain to the client that's big cost. You start adding forms, you're now into thousands of dollars of cost. So do we want to, you know, make that decision or not? So
Right.
we will talk about that after design approval.
Right.
And I'll show them where they're at. Now, the comp that I present is really tight. I try to make it so, I make a full mock-up where they flip through it and everything, see all the color and everything. So it's pretty accurate because I use last year's word counts and lay out the typesetting the same way. So it's pretty accurate on page count already.
This is a 56-pager, isn't it?
And that was a special. We're usually at 48 pages for these guys.
Yeah.
And so they wanted, the timeline and some extra doodads. So
doodads.
they knew that they were paying more
Right.
Because it was a special year they wanted to.
Right.
So it's
and
no problem.
If they want more pages, we tell them.
Yeah. You just be honest.
Yeah. Tell them that it's going to cost more, and or they have to cut the amount of content so we can go less pages. Correct.
Yeah. You know what? Marina's asking. But if don't you have clients who argue or beg? That's good. See, I don't like to leave anything to the imagination with clients because they're not good visual imagination people. So I started my comp when I go in, my 3 comps look exactly like this, minus the tape binding, of course, but they will look really close to this. So there's no ambiguity on what they're getting. And with that, I have everything pretty well knotted down. How many pages is it? I don't get that question. I usually get what kind of binding, but
But the word
Gatefold
count,
and everything is there in the comp. I mean, my comps are like really tight. So, and I spent a little longer on that because I know in the production stage, once they say go, I've already saved a bunch of days. So I'll spend more days on the comps to make them right and accurate and then save time on the production. Yeah, because all I have to do is typeset on the back end and manage art. But no, I get some clients still will try to negotiate, Marina, on things. And it's just a matter of, well, it's all proportional again. Your budget to the amount of pages that you have, that has to be worked out. If it's unreasonable where I want 100 pages and I only have 10 grand, and I want 5,000 units, then we got a problem.
Right.
You have to tell them, well, here's the ratio, kind of a thing. Here's where all the numbers come out, and show them where we're at.
It's not physically possible.
Yeah. I mean, if we get down to actually the education of them learning printing and where the cost ranges are, I'll show them.
Carmina
I'll bring in
has
3 different various. Okay, this perfect bound book, this page count costs around this much. This book at Saddle Stitch costs this much, and so on. So I'll give them an overview kind of a thing. See where in 5,000 chunks, of costs, you're going to be in the 10 to 20,000 range. You're going to be in the 20 to 30,000 range, that kind of thing.
Right.
So it's just a matter of funneling them down to see where they want to be and to get the max amount of communication out of that piece with their budget. How many pages can we get for what you need to say? So that's pretty much what we do. That's a great question, right? Because nowadays, the last 8 years or so, I found myself doing more of that, more education to the client than in previous years. We just rock through it and run it. But now they want to know the creative process and know what, the print process entails. And they're more curious now than they were 10 years ago or so. So. And it's no problem. It's just you get into this long, explanation thing. It'd be awesome if you were there. I could let you talk for half an hour.
Carmina says if the client can edit text or add it, may be done then and there. But if it has to go through copywriter and the president and the director, the arguments might stop then. Yeah.
That depends on the process.
Yeah.
When they start upping and adding words, I tell them start adding costs because if we're going up in pages, we're going to go up in printing costs. So, and if they say fit it on the page, I'm now saying your type is now at 7 point and it's a bit small. I doubt anybody will read it. So we may have to spend more to get that content in, or would you like to cut it?
Yeah.
Let them make the decision on do we need it or not.
Right.
And we'll give our recommendation. Hey, that's important. Can we cut something else out and put this in? That kind of a thing. And so we'll kind of strategize that way.
Right. Those are great questions, guys.
Yeah, these are awesome.
Yeah. Lovely.
See.
She says it's so nice to be working with a copywriter.
Yeah, and I agree. Yeah. See, the thing is, 20 years ago or so, and Marina will attest to this, it really was nice with copywriter because you get the copywriters, like us, kind of a vendor, but they will do revisions, right? But they'll also listen to the design side and going, they understand word count max per page. So when I tell the writer, or the client and the writer, client, we need a section on this subject. And can we get it to, writer, can we get it to 100 words because I need a big graphic here? And it was no problem. Yeah, let me crank that out. I'll do a draft or whatever. But now that a lot of the clients doing their own writing, and basically the writing's got considerably worse because they think they can write, but they can't. You know, they kind of get off-put when they say, hey, could you add more content here to balance out the page? And, you know, they get really, I always hear this term, pushback. Right? But that's a beauty to me of working this way in graphic design, is that we're working back and forth. We're trying to get an artful piece with the subject matter at hand and say the right amount of words, because you don't want to just go drone on and on with words like you do with websites. Shit, they don't even cut the words when you're doing a website. They'll just let it go. And I think it's a big mistake because we're only going to read above the fold anyway on the web. So I try to explain that to them too. There's a sweet spot in amount of words to digest, especially in the corporate world. And try to explain something in a certain amount of words, but you want your chunks to be even all the way across, because when you go to lay it out, it's going to look much more organized and even instead of having holes of white space everywhere. So I used to be strict on word count, 75 words here, 100 words here, 200 here, because I know what's going to happen to layout. And if you want clean layout, the only way to do it is get accurate word count. Right. Also, you have a big paragraph here, tiny paragraph here, all that nonsense. Right. So
we're over an hour, so we're going to wrap it up.
Okay.
But thanks, guys, for attending our first evening alumni call.
Sorry, Marie. You are not.
What were you saying?
It's 20 years ago. I was 8 years, 20 years ago. Right. 8 years old.
Well, have a good night, guys, and I hope you learned something about math. And please definitely
these are great topics.
Comment in our Facebook group and mention back if you have any other questions. Thanks, guys. So have a good night.
Yeah, have a good night. Bye, everyone.
Bye.